Welcome again to Regaining the Balance. We're reading The Philosophy of Fire Part 4 today. I think we have like 120 pages left. So far it's been very interesting. I'm glad that you guys were able to join me today. But this will definitely, some of the stuff in this book are definitely going to tie into future videos I'll be doing. So I'm reading it out so you guys don't have to do it. Either way, let me get this thing going here. And so let me just double check that everything sounds good. Yep, okay, we're good to go. Okay, so the Philosophy of Fire, page 88. Share that screen. Here we go. I'll come back just a little bit, okay? So, the religion of Jesus was that of the ancient mysteries. It was the same wisdom religion, though perhaps the ethical features were more pronounced, as necessitated among what was termed a generation of vipers. The ethical teachings of Jesus in time gave place to priestcraft and sacerdotism, to worldly power and thirst for conquest, and the religion, or rather ceremonialism, of Constantine was finally succeeded by the quote, Holy Inquisition, unquote, a reign of torture and bloodshed. During this reign of terror, the secret schools were suppressed with an iron hand, though in spite of all the Inquisition could do, the schools flourished and never wanted for candidates. As the quote, Holy Inquisition, unquote, gradually lost force, pretenders to occult and mystic powers arose, and the charlatans did untold harm to the secret doctrine. There are many names in history covered obliquely, I guess, and their possessors charged with fraud and imposition who were genuine initiates. The seeker should distinguish, it's a little bit bigger, between self-conviction that comes from the pretender's own mouth and those accusations which come from others and are unsupported by evidence. As a fact, the true master or initiate never under any circumstances makes the claim that he is such. The man or woman who openly claims to be either an initiate or an adept or a master is never what he claims to be, but merely a pretender. The pretender is usually loaded with honors and found rolling in wealth, as the regard of his deceit and lying, of fraud and corruption, which he is shrewd enough to conceal from the masses, but is apparent to the initiate or the master. Man betrays his character, his heredity, his ideas, and all his past life, in every lineament of his face, in the pose of his body, in his gait, in the lines of his hands, the tone of his voice, and the expression of his eyes especially. No man possesses character. Character is that which he is, and not something part of himself. One need not to be master to discover all this. He need only observe, think, reason on what he sees. The individual who is really sincere and devout will not fail to recognize sincerity, true devotion in an acquaintance, or in any character in history that possesses these virtues. Hence the faithful student of the secret doctrine, secret science, though not himself an initiate, soon learns to recognize by unfailing signs those in the present or the past who were really initiates and who had understanding of the wisdom of religion. The real initiate is often gibbeted by the populace and anathematized by the church because he is neither time-serving nor willing to barter the truth for gold. All along the line of history, from the foundation of Atlantis to the present, may be found those who possess the true light, initiates who conceal both their wisdom and their own identity from vulgar notice and foolish praise. They walk the earth in the past, as many do at present, unseen and unrecognized by the multitude, but always known to their associates and all real seekers. These initiates or masters constitute in every age as they do at the present time. The great school, they are the masters of the fraternities known as the Rose Cross, the Magi, and the Illuminati, not the Bavarian Illuminati, as they said earlier on in this book, just so you guys understand. For be it known to all who would find the light, to all who would trod the path, these secret schools exist today as they did in the past, and initiates are to be found in them in greater number today than since the time of the fall of Egypt the Glorious. Whether these initiates congregate beneath vaulted domes or meet at stated times, no one would be likely to know unless he belonged to the same degree as those called. But one thing is certain, they help to bring knowledge to humanity when most needed and often shape the destinies of nations. They are working today in the West as they have never labored before. They are enabled to give their series to many because the way has been prepared for them by, quote, those who know, unquote, and the present century will yet know more of them. Okay, you've got a section called Misconceptions. Misconceptions. A destructive misconception so often met with in those who are apparently following the path to a higher evolution, leading them to believe, often to teach, that in order to follow the illuminating life, one must ignore the body and its physical powers, the family and its necessities, the sex and its demands. It's totally devoid of any foundation in fact. The secret schools teach that man must, quote, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, unquote, neglecting none of the four divisions of his being, giving equal attention to each department of his nature, at the same time inculcating the positive doctrine that a man allowing anything to interfere with his search for the ultimate of conscious individuality, quote, the word in parentheses, the Holy Grail, is a weakling and a disgrace to his creator. Alrighty. Alright, the philosophy of fire. This is a strange book. Just the way that it's structured. Excuse me. The philosophy of fire underlies all true initiation, as well as the secret doctrine and the ancient mysteries. It is likewise the foundation upon which rest all mystic and occult fraternities. Of all the secret orders of the present day, probably more is known of the grand fraternity of the Rose Cross than of any of the other secret schools. This is not because the fraternity itself has given extensively of its teachings to the profane world, but rather through the voluminous writings of such of its members as Hargrave Jennings, Pascal Beverly Randolph, Lord Belvoir Lytton, Honore de Balzac, Freeman B. Dowd, and others, in a manifesto published during the year 1871 by the Supreme Master of the Triple Order, P.B. Randolph, M.D., it is freely admitted the foundation of the teachings of the fraternity is the philosophy of fire. It is urged against us that we believe in and practice magic. We admit the fact, we certainly do, the pure white magic, the pure white, bright, effulgent, radiant, glorious magic of the human will, though through and by which alone human passions are made to correct themselves, and by which alone otherwise defenseless women is fully armed against the coarse brutality of thousands of misnamed, quote, men and husbands. And this is purely Christic power, too, an integrant of the early Christic faith, dead here and buried nearly everywhere else beneath mountains of gabble dust and deserts of error. So we have two little things here. The Grand Fraternity is composed of the Triple Order, Rose Cross Order, the Temple of the Rosy Cross, and the Hierarchy of Euless. And then the second one is the Occult Arcanum, which is right here. The Human Will, the Occult Arcanum. Voila. It is further charged that we have, quote, certain quite extraordinary esoteric or secret doctrines, unquote. We admit the fact, and the animus is apparent from that other fact, namely that these secret doctrines are only divulged in the pure, virtuous, and worthy. Our assailants failed in all their schemes to penetrate these mysteries, and the inference is plain, nor can even the disaffected fail to see the, quote, reasons why, unquote. Now, however, we herewith present some of these secret doctrines. We teach the deity dwells within the cryptic portals of the luminous worlds, and that the lamp that lights it is supreme love. We assert that no power ever comes to man through the intellect, that goodness alone is power, and that pertains to the heart only. Hence, the power comes to the soul only through love, not lust, mind you, but love. The underlying female fire life, subtending the bases of being, the formative flowing floor of the world, the true sensing of which is the beginning of the road to personal power. Love lieth at the foundation and is the synonym of life and strength and clingingness. This formative flowing floor of the world. It's an interesting It's an interesting way to put that. Holding as we do, the deity dwells within the shadow behind everlasting flame, the amazing glories of which minds have confounded with every god. We declare all things, especially the human soul, to be born of fire. That man is not the only intelligence in nature, but that there are the aerial spaces abound with multiform intelligences having their conscious origins in Earth. Fundamental teachings of Earth priesthood. I'll have to look that one up. As a man has as man has his inner matter, and that there are grades of these, towering away in infinite series of hierarchies, human and ultra-human, to an unimaginable etern. We inculcate that doctrine that the soul is a polar world of white fire within the human body, that is, its negative pole resides within the brain as a general dwelling, that in dreamless sleep it goes to the polar plexus, abdominal brain, to impart stores of life fire to the body. In dream it visits by sight and report other scenery, that all dreams have a determinate meaning and purpose, even though they may merely indicate indigestion or the eating of improper food, which will produce disease in the system. We maintain that the other pole of the soul is situated within the genital system, pelvic brain, that the superior pole of the soul is in direct magnetic and ethereal contact with the soul of being, the foundation fire of the universe, with all that vast domain underlying increase, growth, emotion, beauty, power, heat, energy, the soul and base, soul as in SOLE this time, and base of being, the subtending live or fire floor of existence. Hence, through love, man seizes directly on all that is and can come into actual contact and rapport with every being that feels and loves and dwells within the confines of God's inhabitable universe, declaring that true manhood is more or less en rapport with one or more of the upper hierarchies of intelligent potentialities, earthborn and not earthborn. We believe and teach there are means whereby a person may become associated with and receive instruction from them. More than that, we believe in talismans, that is possible to construct and wear them, and that they emit a particular light discernible across the gulfs of space by these intelligent powers, just as we discern a diamond across a playhouse, that such signal to the beholders that they will and do cross the chasmal steeps to save, succor, and assist the wearer, just as a good brother here flies to the relief of him who shall give the grand hailing signs of distress. God, the soul of the universe, is positive heat, celestial fire, the aura of deity. God, Od, is love, the prime element of all power, the external fire sphere, the informative pulse of matter. The induction is crystalline, for it follows that whoso hath most love, whether its expression be coarse or fine, cultured or rude, hath therefore most of God in him or her, the element of time being competent to the perfection of all refining influences over the ocean, if not upon hither side. Another Rosicrucian wrote, justice is so late. You know what? I'm just going to quickly highlight that. Another Rosicrucian wrote, justice is so late of arrival to all original thinkers. The terms of prejudice and astonishment, not in the good sense, are so long in falling off from profound researchers that even now the Rosicrucians, in other words, the Paracelsians or magneticists, are totally ignored as the art chemists and the experimenters in fire whose deep thoughts and unrelaxing labors modern science is indebted for most of its truths. As astrology, not the jugglers of the stars, but the true explorers seeking the method of being and the working of the glittering inhabitants of space, was the mother of astronomy, so is the lore of the Hermetic Brethren, the groundwork of all present philosophy. On its applied side, Rosicrucianism is a science which is so familiar and so valuable, but as the Hermetic Rosicrucian beliefs are a great religion, they are, of course, They, of course, have their popular adaptations, and in consequence, there is a mythology to them. There must always be a machinery, symbolism, to every faith through which it may be known, and the mistake of people is accepting the childish machinery and colored mythology of a religion for the religion itself. Very good point. Fantastical, and transcendental, nay, impossible, as the studies and objects of the Rosicrucians seem to be in these modern ultra-practical days, it is forgotten that the truths of contemporaneous science are all based on the dreams of old thinkers. Out of the natural philosophy, the occult brethren sought the spirit of natural philosophy, and to this inner heaven, so unlike ordinary life, through purification of the self, through invocations, uh, through humbling in prayers, through penances to change the desire of the body for worldly things, through fumigations and incensing to raise up another world about them and to place themselves en rapport with the inhabitants of it, through the purifying of the senses and thereby to the opening of the finer senses, to the shutting out of one state in order to make possible the passing into another state. To all this the Rosicrucians sought to reach. And over here on invocations, it says invocation development belongs particularly to the Magi system of soul growth. And let's not forget, the Magi went and visited good old Jesus. The Hermetic Doctrine is merely a part of the universal Rosicrucian system, a branch of the Grand Fraternity. Their teachings concerning fire are identical with the Rosicrucian doctrines. Fire is at once the great purifier and separator of elements. It is the hell for the evil, but on the pure spirit it works no injury. For pure soul is also the soul of the fire. The whole world must be purified by this fire, the intensity of true love for the new dispensation. When we recall the fact that fire is also the basis of life, we will understand what love really is and may do for us and the whole human family. Like all other things he touches, the undeveloped man has constantly acted to draw down to his plane of everything belonging to the higher conception of sex, which is itself a form of fire. He forgets it is the direct emanation of the divine creative thought. All the highest, purest, and sweetest thought lead up to the manifestation of the sex condition and sex forces, as the Alpha and Omega, at once the beginning and the end of both desire and fulfillment. It holds within itself the whole divine statement of being, and God said, "Let there be," and there was. Life and death are in it, the outpouring and the indrawing. All the great lessons of living and acting are held in the three-lettered word of unperfected activity, as in sex. The law of love, God expression in man, holds its basis of manifestation on the health activity of the sex function, the basis wherein dwells the physical fire. The beginning and the end of life, if we so will it, is held here. The moment of conclusion is the beginning of a new life. It is also the moment of death, the death point at which the whole organism enters into the realms of dissolution, as it is ever striving to do. But the great sex force and body of life carries always forward and beyond, so there shall be no dwelling within the house of death. It is in this, quote, house of the fire of life wherein is manifested the completion of the divine plan. It is here the was becomes the is, and the passes the was becomes the is, or and the Isis passes into the shall be. It is through this differentiation that the great Trinity manifests unto itself. Verily, the kingdom of heaven, the power of God, lies within us for the transmission of life. His knowledge of its origin is the point at which his supremacy assumes for itself unquestioned authority. The omnipotence of the only one unity, love, sex, and fire are one, the three in one. And we get divine alchemy. In Sweden, on the 1st of May, the opening or germination of the year, the peasantry, as they do all over the north at certain times, light fires. A candle is lighted by an all-devout Catholics on Christmas Eve and is kept burning in memory as the reminder of the mysterious incarnation until the dawning of the real day of the Blessed Nativity. The Yule log, whose bright blazing is of so much moment that with the last brand of it most carefully and superstitiously laid aside for the purpose, the next year's Christmas fires to be lighted. follows the same rule. The Christmas tree, the origin of which is lost in the mists of tradition in which Teutonic emblem, time out of mind, employed in Germany, was transposed into England, though without the slightest suspicion of its pagan meaning, is the mystic northern sacrifice and the attestation in its multitudinous blazing candles to the genius or the god of the fire. The toys, representing all the things of man and of the earth which are suspended among the bogs in its mystic light, are the sacrifices of all good things of the world and all the products of the creative fiat, as in surrender and acknowledgement back to the unknown living spirit or immortal producer who has chosen fire as his symbol and his shadow. If the reader will refer to the crest of His Royal Highness Prince Albert, he will find the mystic magic horns distinctly set up. The reproduction of the ever-recurring symbol, which is recognizable as horns, wings, or otherwise in the head pieces of his ancestors of the north, the rough rustic soldiers who in their barbarian incursions overturned in the Roman beliefs and buried in the ruins of the empire a faith identical in its secrets with their own, all ignorant of the fact that the symbols of both spoke but the same tale, the original solar fire faith. The laurel wreath around the head of the heroes and emperors accorded only to the great conquerors, the emperor or the poet, majestic triplicate, not only mark out the line and denote the place of the organs of the highest intellectual and godlike faculties in the brows of the human being, but prove the knowledge of the ancients of phrenology and represent the original starry radius, that which symbolically invests the head of all gods. It speaks the spirit flame radius, magnetic and supernatural, intensifying to its real magico-generative power in a circle of intolerable light about the head, in which mystic light, all magic and sorcery, as well as all sainthood, was supposed by the Rosicrucians to be possible in accordance with the laws of the supernatural fire world. Now, what they're talking about here is also known in Buddhism as, I forget exactly what it is, but it's like attaining absolute enlightenment and disappearing into like a flash of rainbow color into the ether, so to speak. So it's a very similar type of things, and they in Buddhism also has a lot of fire stuff as well within all their iconography. Continuing, crowns, garlands, wreaths, all the insignia of dignity that encircle the head and all passing, be it remarked over this physico-phrenology places of the faculties of quote, causality, comparison, wonder, and imagination, unquote, and in tracing them along, disclosing and glorifying all the bodily points of the means of the greatness of man, mitres and priestly head coverings, the tonsure of the sacerdotes freeing the sacred circle of the intellect, in which may the terrifically grand very apprehension of God himself be realized, from the barbarian and the degraded, nay, brute-like growth of hair, the very investiture and most closely branded confession, and the complete and irresistible conviction of the beasts most abundant and the grossest there were in the scale, lowest, scepters, wands, priestly staves, or crosiers, batons, and maces, all these mark of rank with the original disc, orb, mound, surmounting with the mystical symbol of the cross, the royal rods or scepters of the European monarchs. All these forms are but the changes and reproduction of the rod of the magician, he whose creed was the fire faith and whose secret means of working upon nature was the mysterious sorcerer sign, quote unquote, displayed upon and through which he declared the quote unquote images of the world, and conversed with the real substrata of which he pronounced was by spells, as spirit visages were only to be won to the sight or through enchantments. Wow. Okay. Just gonna really quickly highlight that because holy smokes, that is quite the mouthful. But there's a lot to unpack in these last 2 pages here. I'm not gonna do it now. It has already been indicated that both Krishna and Orpheus taught the Christian mysteries. Buddha, another founder of religion, also taught these mysteries and secret doctrines, but in their negative form. The subject of Buddhism is the obscurest in the world round of learned inquisition, says Hargrave Jennings. This is old and beyond all measure, broadest and sublimest of all the religions of the East. This ancient and really philosophical belief demands a capacity to grab abstractions before its principles can be understood. Men who argue from effect to cause, who ap- apprehend cause as all, that is, cause as gathered from an experience derivable from being, cannot but fail in attaining to the disclosure of it. Materialism is a constant charge urged upon the Buddhist. In one sense, materialism is correctly assured of him, for Buddhism denounces all being apart from form as impossible. It is the purest Spinozism. It is identical with it. Accepted with the literal eye, the tenets of the Indian theology, the reference to its Buddhist groundwork, appear to present the usual average of mythological fabling, but we judge upon the means of expression, not upon the thing expressed. That, in the very terms of expression, has escaped as the reconciliation of that which knows no sense, which apprehension through the means of sense alone must always be impossible. Man's very being, that is, the laws by which he is, or his mind, shut him up, as it were, within themselves, or itself, as in a prison, and all his knowledge of all of things come from that light shining within his prison, his mind. Within that radius, the light is perfect, and he himself perfect. But what guesses he, or can he know of the great light without? That light to him may be no light. Light is material, being, itself only necessary to matter and the life of it, or the soul of the world. This was the faith taught by those Persians who believed in the one universal groundwork of light, the soul or ultimate principle of everything to be known, which is the religion of the Magi, of Zoroaster, of the Gubres, of the modern Indian Parsis, of the Middle Age European Bohemians, the remains of whom fire palaces or fire temples are yet to be seen, crumbling indeed into their own god, light around this reverend and time-battered as well as war-battered Prague. Man is the center to himself in his light of mind, shining as in his castle and prison of body. The forceful outer day, the god of the universal circle of things, once in its violent inquest fixed, cranny, and penetrating, would annihilate the temporary possessor of the tenement and absorb all within, that is him, to itself, laws to light, organism to broad being, until reincorporate, that is concrete. The whole round world is as microcosm whose wonders are exhaustless, whose beauties are beyond expression, whose changes, whose decay, this was a misspelling, whose recommitment into new forms is as the ceaseless revolvement of the inexpressible glory. Through the sea floors and their multitudinous mimic continents, fruitful of moving life, fecund with their three growths and their semi-sylvian, semi-oceanic vegetation, through the clouds of the seas that rest or roll over them, through which speed the winged ships as golden, sunlighted specks, through the hollow-crusted earth and its rigid rocks, earth-torn and battered like a battle-beaten man of eternal war, as it circles, it resounds away amidst the roads of the lighted stars, bearing into the changing sun and to the cold, renewing moon, its ploughed side globing up, still defiant with the wounds of the contentions of centuries and with the retardation of the space forces, through the built, quote unquote, built work of nature. In short, runs the ever coursing inner spirit, which forces in its stupendous track, comet like, in parentheses, the bordering matter into flame, to life. It is not all the world a woven issue. Is not all the world a woven tissue, wizard colored, of which the creative sun strikes the spangles into sparkling, stains prismatically with the rose hues of being, or the blues of decay, or rather change? Roars not old ocean with his caves, as the Nereid music swelleth or sinketh to fascination. Sorry. Roars not old ocean with his caves, as the Nereid music dwelleth or sinketh to fascination loudly or faintly through its shell? Fire and smoke and springs, steam attest the attenuate bulk spun through the hands of the great magnetic life, or by the power of the earth body into tissues. What is at the force in the mighty heart of the great world but the spouting fire? What are the magnificent air shapes of our atmosphere? What the cross cloud platforms of our sky? What the reduplicate and multiplicate what the reduplicate and multiplicate fogwork and flocculence of the western or eastern heavens, when the golden or burning light is poured through the heaping wonder worlds of the magician of the great air. That should be all the cloud setting of our sky, but as the precipitate and dross of the mere quote used up matter unquote, glorious to our senses as even all the refuses. That was one really long question, so I'm sorry if I butchered that. And if fire be in its own nature, so to speak, but the roaring back, the illuminate of nature from the real into the unreal, as which the Magi teach, and as which the worshippers of the spirit of fire believe, then the very existence of material light shall be but as the very excess of the dense matter, remonstrating, as it were, itself the brighter as it is, in itself the blacker. Nor are these the vagaries of philosophers, but the world-old persuasions, when the vanity of knowledge had not made a base machine of wheels of the world. Let us rest with the sublime assurance, the kingdom of God lieth much nearer to us than we believe in our vain imagination of possibilities. Yea, it is at our door, God on our threshold. We all the while, Peter-like, denying him, denying the spirits because we cannot feel the spirit. The old Buddhists, as equally as the ancient believers in the doctrine of the universal spiritual fire, taught that spiritual light was the floor or basis of all created things. The material side or complement of this spiritual light being fire, into which elements of all things could be rendered, in which fire or heat was the motive of all things that are. They taught that matter or mind, as the superflux, as the sum of sensations, or as natural and unreal, shows of their various kinds, were plied as layer on layer, or tissue on tissue, on this immutable and immortal floor or groundwork of divine flame, the soul of the world. So essentially what they're really explaining here, if you guys know anything about quantum physics, is that strange realm of everything exists as a wave until consciousness looks at it type of thing. The groundwork, the immortal floor groundwork. And i.e., when consciousness does pay attention to things, that's when things are manifested. And it's a very strange scientific phenomenon. If you guys don't really know too much about it, I wouldn't suggest looking up the double slit experiment as a basis. Continuing, such is the magnificent view the Buddhists hold of creation. Is it any wonder that it has more votaries than any other system of religion? Fire, love, God is the foundation of this philosophy, though in this instance taught in negative form that God can be reached by means of contemplation rather than by work, which supplies us with the key as to the reason a few Englishmen can rule millions of the inhabitants of India. Yep. This is also, this book, what they're explaining here also, in so many strange sentences, in various interesting ways of putting things. So what they're really telling you is the nature of how consciousness works. And if you're really paying attention to this, you'll pay attention to the fact that they're talking about the mind in and of itself, and people who understand that, and obviously these people and other people obviously do, they use that against you. And here you go, which supplies us the key as to the reason a few Englishmen can rule millions of the inhabitants of India. They did it through consciousness only. That's the only way to do it. That's why someone like Gandhi, who showed up after this book was written, showed the opposite of this statement right here. Okay, well, one man was able to take millions by using ideas in love. What is it? Maybe not fire, but love, God, all that kind of stuff. And he did the opposite of this. So keep that in mind. Continuing, the emotion Intensity in mind agitation, thought according to the powers of the unit or a lifting heavenward, or as the dots or dimples in the ever-flowing on-wave of being were, to speak in the familiar sense, quote, as impressions down, unquote, perhaps through and through its covers, upon this living floor of spiritual flame, the escape of which was the magnetism of the body, supersensual force or miracle of the spirit. The Paracelsists of the 16th century were also philosophers of fire, known as such. The philosophers of fire, or philosophiae per ignem, were known throughout every country of Europe and declared that the intimate scenes of natural things were only to be known by the trying effects of fire directed in a chemical process. They insisted that human reason might be a dangerous and deceitful guide, that no real progress could be made in knowledge or in religion by it, and that to all vital, that is, supernatural purpose, it was a vain thing. They also taught that divine and supernatural exaltation was the only means of arriving at truth. Their name of the Paracelsists was derived from Paracelsus, the eminent physician and chemist who was the chief philosopher of this school. And I'll just read the star after Paracelsus. After the fame fraternities or discovery of the fraternity of the most laudable order of the Rosicrucians was issued by Christian Rosicrucians, they became known as the Rosicrucians. See the Rosicrucians and their teachings, which is another book I have. In England, Robert Flood was their great advocate and exponent. Riviere, who wrote in France, Severinus, an author in Denmark, Kunrath, an eminent physician of Dresden, and Daniel Hoffman, professor of divinity in the University of Helmstedt, have also treated largely on Paracelsus and on his system. Akin to the school of the ancient philosophers and the magneticists of later periods is Dr. Enhermoso, of the same caste as these speculators and searchers into the mysteries of nature, drawing from the same source, were the Theosophists. The Paracelsists were termed Theosophists by this author of the 16th and 17th century. These practiced chemistry, which they asserted that they could explain the profoundest secrets of nature, as they strove above all earthly knowledge after the divine and sought the divine light and fire through which all men acquire the true wisdom. They were called the fire philosophers. As a great general principle, they called a soul a fire taken from the eternal ocean of light. I just want to come back here. Yeah, okay. All right. Hargrave Jennings, the Rosicrucian and philosopher, says, "We must thus sum our historical examination that every turn of our inquiry meet light, at every crossroad, as it were, of our laborious journey and of our philosophical pilgrimage, we encounter this pertinacious and ever-flowing light, not only at birth, but as taking a prominent part in the torch celebration at marriage, and again, more impressively, at death and in the ceremonials of the sepulchre. The phantom of light never fails." I just want to make one quick point here. Not only at birth, okay, ever flowing, not only at birth. I'm going to, in the follow-up video that I'll be doing, which will be an analysis of this book with lots of information and pictures, so it could show you guys just how much information is in this book coincides with so much stuff that's all over the place. And one of the things I'm going to show you is that this part here, the not only at birth, is that for the very first time, scientists were able to take a picture of a sperm entering an egg, and at the moment of its entering, there was a flash of light. So that's crazy. Again, like, this is the first time it's ever happened. This was a couple of months ago or something like that. So that's pretty interesting to me. Anyways, continuing. Where was I? Okay, yep. All right. It is more dimly, or the brighter, the more gloriously. and the more cheerfully celebrant, or the more awfully full aware, or I'm sorry, let me go back. It is the more dimly or the brighter, the more gloriously and the more cheerfully celebrant, or the more awfully full everywhere disclosed. As everything, it must, through disguised, be everything. What may mean this concentrate, resplendent fifure? This ever flowing myth, this terrible and yet this grand angel found at the couch side of our birth, accompanying us as the best and most distant sacrifice to the altar of presentation, where our mother bows in her thanksgiving to the holy God who has helped her in her time of need, and who has equally made birth and life and death, and has equally vouchsafed safety in each and all. What is that? What is that? What is this that presseth in chiefest of guests at our marriages, in all the splendor of his yellow glow, and awaiting with his face shrouded, with his pale lights, and abounding in ghostly tapers, through in the glory of the hope of heaven? Sorry, that wasn't a question. At last, at at that last solemn scene, where the very cause of the sable royalties, black, imperial, and then alike to poor and rich, in the common spirit threshold upon which we all stand, is as the smallest and very often the least thought of all the show. What to include is this fire which is so constantly about us, and of which we think so little and know so little, but which seems overwhelmingly much? What is this wondrous universal element, or least provable soul of the world, which hath been so significantly and yet unsuspectedly mythed universally through intelligent ages? What is this magic reflection which is glassed through time? We ask thinkers for an answer, but only out of their meditations, only out of the impossibility of denial, do we hope to wring the confessions of the divine spirit that is in the fire. Of course, we have no reference to material fire, but to something of which the material fire is merely an image, being the imparticled spirit, in which everything is at one, as in which all the things are only unreal, and unreal things out of the world are the only real. Let me read that one again, sorry. Of course, we have no reference to material fire, but to something of which the material fire is merely an image, being the imparticled spirit in which everything is at one, as in which are the things only unreal. And unreal things are the only real. Say, unreal things, in parentheses, out of the world, close parentheses, are the only real. Through two baptismals must the initiate pass, through the baptism of both fire and water. The mysterious meaning of baptism by water as a symbolism prevailing through all faiths, heathen and Christian, it is that of the earliest traditions, or the Pythagorean transmigration. Again, Phoenician. Okay, and Phoenicians were a sea people. Not adjudged as by its vulgar reading, but as signifying the onward dissolution into nothingness of being, that is, of this being through the farthest separated (parentheses sever), in which man always is, and therefore always is baptized (unquote), close parentheses, matter, water. Let me read that again. It is that of the earliest traditions of the Pythagorean transmigration, not adjudged by as its vulgar reading, but as signifying the onward dissolution into nothingness of being, that is, of this being, through the farthest separated matter and water. Matter or slash water. This, therefore, is the only element for a rite. Holy water, the ablution, also signifying the same, although the church has lost the meaning. Thence, as from the next loosest of matter, water, the only possible symbol for a rite, man is delivered into the farther supernatural airy changes where matter ceases, loosening utterly from above him, and then the spirit of fire begins, taking up the matter undulations. This is the freedom into the foundations or inspiring light, the God flame of the Magi, the Holy Spirit of the Christians, the everything out of this state and the nothing in it of all religions. Life, nay, all existence, being considered as a purgatory of a severer or a more assuasive order, and therefore being evil or God's shadow for the very reason it's being life or consciousness at all. This is the mystic meaning of the text in the New Testament where John declares, I indeed baptize you with water unto repentant, but repentance. It's kind of the text is kind of not well printed here. I indeed baptize you with water unto the repentance, but he that comes after me is mightier than I. Those shoes I am not worthy to bear. He shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost. In the language of the philosophers, this is the baptism with fire. Intellectuality. It is a fundamental doctrine of these secret schools that the intellectual attainments are highly desirable and to be encouraged through mental brilliancy alone will not make conscious individuality a possibility. On the contrary, it may and often does give the possessor an exalted opinion of himself, critical of both the teachings and the actions of those who could help him on the way, unwilling to obey instructions and prone to argue the method indicated by the instructor, thus preventing him from traveling the lowly path leading to soul illumination, the boon of immortality. All right, the sacred fire, continuing of philosophy of fire. And if you guys don't mind, I need to go throw a piece of wood in my stove. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that, guys. And we're back. Okay, so that was really interesting. Um, okay, wet my whistle. The sacred fire, continuing of philosophy of fire. The appearance of God to mortals seems always to have been in brightness and great glory, whether he was angry and in displeasures or benign and kind. These appearances are mentioned throughout the Bible. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeded loud, so that all the people that were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke therefore descended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And then the voice of the trumpet sounded long, and waxed louder and louder. Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go down and charge the people, lest they break through unto the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. And let the priests also, which come near to the Lord, sanctify themselves, lest the Lord break forth upon them. In Exodus 19:16 to 23, we have been taught that by means of connecting. Let me start over. We have been taught that by means of connections made between man and God through Jesus, who became the Christ, God would draw nearer to mankind. The Lord God appeared to Moses long before the time of Jesus, when mankind is said to have been far less evolved than at the present. Then why should God be unable to appear to man at the present time? Only one answer is possible. Either man is retrograded, which we cannot and do not admit, or God is just as willing to appear to man today as he was in the past, provided man brings about the conditions making his appearance possible. In these verses, it is likewise clearly indicated that it is dangerous for anyone to attempt to come into the presence of God for the fire in which he may appear, if such are not carefully and thoroughly prepared. For he said to Moses, quote, "Go down, charge the people, lest they break through unto the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish." Unquote. This is why fundamental doctrine taught in the ancient mysteries, just as it is in the secret schools of the present, that man may so live as to make it possible for God to appear unto him and instruct him through the medium of the fire. And furthermore, if man attempts to come into the presence of God or draws unto himself the sacred fire before he is fully prepared, death may result. And not one particle has the secret school changed in all these years since the mighty initiate priest ruled wisely in Egypt, since Moses led away the Israelites after the priesthood had fallen into degradation, or the time when Jesus was trained by the Essenes. In Deuteronomy, God instructs Moses that he should teach the people that he had led to safety so they might remain a great people. It would be well if the people of the present age might heed these same instructions and profit greatly thereby. For what nation is there so great who hath God so nigh unto them, as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for? Question mark. Sorry. And what nation is there so great that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as this law which I set before you this day? Only take heed to thyself, and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thine eyes have seen, and lest they depart from thy heart all the days of thy life, but teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons, especially the day that thou stoodest before the Lord thy God in Horeb, when the Lord said unto me, Gather me the people together, and I will make them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they shall live upon the earth, and that they may teach their children. And ye came near and stood under the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire unto the midst of heaven, with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. And the Lord spake unto you out of the midst of the fire, and he heard a voice of the words, but saw no similitude, only ye heard a voice. In this instance, it matters little whether we interpret this to mean the fire within Moses, which we call the soul, thus spoke to him, or whether it actually God himself. In the one instance, it would be the voice of God through the living soul within Moses, while in the other, it would be God speaking directly to Moses. But even so, God does not speak to the material man, only to the soul of man, which is likewise a fire, as does God always appear through fire, which he is. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro and his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and held the flock to the backside of the desert, and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked and beheld the bush burning with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see the great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am, here am I. And he said, Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Why should the bush have been on fire, yet remained unconsumed? Simply because the bush here has a reference to the body, the physical being named Moses, while the fire within the bush represented the soul of Moses, having become awakened into communication with God, as always happens when man travels the path which leads to illumination. The voice which spake unto Moses was that of the soul of the conscious. It was the soul becoming conscious and in communication with God which spake unto Moses and instructed him what he should do. It is through this message received by Moses from God whereon it is based the doctrine of the modern secret schools, as well as that of Masonry, which inculcates the tenet requiring the profane to free themselves of shoes and ordinary clothing before they may enter the path of initiation. It is representative of giving up all that is material and destructive when one enters the path, shoes being an emblematic of all that is material, earthly, and temporary. That's why you always see a shoe in all their iconography. There's always this like random shoe. The appearances of the angel of God presence, or that divine person who represents God, likewise, the presence which is symbolic of God, are always in brightness. Or in other words, the Shekhinah was always surrounded with glory. This seems to have given occasion to those of old to image fire as the sphere in which God dwelt. It was the fire from the Lord which consumed upon the altar the burnt offerings of Aaron, And Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of the congregation and came out and blessed the people. And the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the people. And there came a fire out from the Lord and consumed upon the altar the burnt offerings and the fat, which when all the people saw, they shouted and fell on their faces. Strange it seems that people in this age should be willing to believe God was willing to accept the offerings of the ancient people, but if one of us were to attempt to preach the incense offered to God with a prayerful heart and noble desires were accepted to him, we would be considered as either insane or fanatics. Nevertheless, if God made laws of the creation of order out of chaos, which is the slogan of the Masons, by the way. Nevertheless, if God made laws at the creation of order out of chaos, then those laws must exist today as they did in the beginning. God being unchangeable, that which he created must likewise be unchangeable. Otherwise, he would not be the unchangeable God, and being unchangeable, he could not be eternal, since that which is everlasting and eternal must be unchangeable. Yep. In Judges we find, and Gideon went in and made ready a kid and unleavened cakes of an ephah or flour. The flesh he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot and brought it out to him under the oak and presented it. The angel of God said to him, take the flesh and the uncleavened cakes and lay them upon the rock and pour out the broth, and he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put forth the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the flesh and the unleavened cakes, and there rose up fire out of the rock and consumed the flesh and the unleavened cakes, and then the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. The things the ancients did in goodness of heart, manifesting, so that was Judges 6:19-21. The things that the ancients did in goodness of heart, manifesting thereby their willingness to be a servant in the sight of their God, was accepted to God. And likewise is this true at the present day. God requires the services of his creation as much as the present time as he did then, if not more so, and only the unbelief of the multitudes prevents the Lord from manifesting himself unto his creatures. And David built there an altar unto the Lord, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and called upon the Lord. And he answered him from heaven by fire upon the altar of burnt offerings. And the Lord commanded the angel, and he put up his sword again to the sheath thereof. And at that time, when David saw the Lord had answered him in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, then he sacrificed there. For the tabernacle of the Lord, which Moses made in the wilderness, and the altar of the burnt offerings, were at that season in the high place at Gibeon. That's 1 Chronicles 21:26-29. At the dedication of the temple of Solomon, God showed his pleasure by appearing in a fire and consuming the burnt offering. And then, quote, now that when Solomon had made an end of praying, the fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offerings and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the house. And the priests could not enter in the house of the Lord, because the glory of the Lord had filled the Lord's house. And when all the children of Israel saw how the fire came down and the glory of the Lord upon the house, they bowed themselves with their faces to the ground upon the pavement and worshipped and praised the Lord, saying, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. 2 Corinthians 7:1-3. About 100 years thereafter, Elijah made an extraordinary sacrifice in proof that Baal was not a god. And it came to pass at the time, quote, and it came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice that Elijah the prophet came near and said, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, Jacob, let it be known that this day thou art God in Israel, and that I am thy servant, and I have done all these things at thy word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that thou art the Lord, and that thou hast turned their heart back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and kicked and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they said, Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. And Elijah said unto them, take the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they took them, and Elijah brought them down to Brook Kishon and slew them there. Wow. What's 1 Kings 18:36-40? That's, there you go. That's some bloodshed. And we're going to get into a video not too long from now that's going to be picking apart both the Old Testament and the New Testament, because as much as they seem to want to treat Baal and these Phoenician type of gods, they seem to be strangely interconnected with these people. all throughout these books, including the New Testament. Once you really start to look in between the lines, it's really incredible. But that'll be for a whole new series. So, already in Genesis, man had become degraded, and through the medium of fire, God made the covenant with Abraham. Quote, but in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passes between those pieces. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river Euphrates. Unquote. Of such vast importance was it to every woman to become a mother, that when those who were barren called upon the Lord for relief from their unhallowed state, the Lord listened unto them. Thus we find in the 13th chapter of Judges, and an angel appeared to the wife of Manoah. Now the wife of Manoah was barren, and the angel promised her birth of a child if she obeys certain instructions, which it would be well if all women of our most glorious enlightened age would follow. Quote, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman, and said unto her, behold, now thou art barren, and bearest not, but thou should conceive and bear a son. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. For lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines. It's Judges 13, 3 through 5. And, yep, so this is talking about Samson here, because the blade will not touch his hair, right? And just so you guys understand something, Nazarite, as I have discovered not too long ago, Nazarite basically means one with God, or one walks with God. So keep that in mind. And because this is an Old Testament, this is said here in the Old Testament, right? And then you have the Jesus of Nazareth, or the Nazarene, Jesus the Nazarene. One of the interesting things is that the town of Nazareth is not as old as you might think it is, and that this word was much older because it meant something else. It meant one with God, a little bit like, well, either way. Well, actually, to tell you the truth, Nazarite and the word Emmanuel mean almost the same thing. God with us in Aramaic. One with God, Nazarite. Just want to point that out, okay? I'll be doing more about this in a future video, but that's, if you guys never knew that, it kind of puts a different spin on the word Nazarene. There is a sound scientific reason for the instructions given the wife of the Danite. Both wine and other strong drink, as well as meats, unclean things, are acid in their nature, and eating of them may, and often does, create such an acidity of the system that the lochia of the woman is so acid in its nature as to destroy the... let me make sure I have this. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Destroy the seed and prevent impregnation of the ovum. Manoah desired to speak with the angels, and at his request God allowed the angel to appear before him, though Manoah thought it a man. Quote, so Manoah took a kid with a meat offering and offered it upon a rock to the Lord, and the angel did wondrously, and Manoah and his wife looked on. For it came to pass, when the flame went up towards heaven from off the altar, that the angel of the Lord ascended into the flame of the altar, and Manoah and his wife looked on it and fell on their faces to the ground. Again, Judges 14, 19 through 20. The first appearance of God then being in a glory, or which is the same thing in light or fire, and he showing his acceptance of sacrifices in so many instances by consuming them with fire. Hence it was that the Eastern people, and particularly the Persians, fell into the worship of fire as a symbol of God's presence. Worshipped God in or through fire, from the Assyrians or Chaldeans or Persians. This worship was propagated southward among the Egyptians and western among the Greeks, and by them it was brought into Italy. Now, I just want to make sure that he is naming every single one of these like civilizations except for the Phoenicians. And they're all related to this thing, and I think that's a big clue as well, because as much as they're telling you stuff from their order and their beliefs and whatever else, they're still not going to tell you everything. And the Phoenician side of this is a big key, and I'm going to do an entire series of videos on the Phoenicians themselves, because they seem to have affected so much in history, but yet nobody knows anything about them. So, and even though he's talking about this, even mentioning Phoenicians themselves, but erroneously calling them Greeks, I think on purpose. So I just want to throw that out there. So I'll go back to that one here. From the Assyrians or Chaldeans or Persians, this worship was propagated southward among the Egyptians, westward among the Greeks, and by them it was brought into Italy. The Greeks were wont to meet together to worship in their Parthenia, and there they consulted for the public good. There was a constant fire kept upon the altar, which was dignified by the name of Vesta. By some, the fire itself was properly Vesta, and so Ovid said, quote, this is in Latin, necte aliud vestum quam vivem intelligere flammam, unquote. The Pyrtania were the atria of the temples, wherein a fire was kept that was never suffered to go out. On the change in architectural forms from the pyramidical or horizontal to the obeliscar, or the upright or vertical, the flames were transferred from the altars or cubes to the summits of the typical uprights or towers, or the tops of the candles, such as we see them used now in Catholic worship, which are called tapers, from their tapering or pyramidal form, and which are supposed to always to indicate the divine presence or influence. This through the symbolism that there is in living light, which is the last exalted show of fluent or inflamed brilliant matter, passing off into the unknown and unseen world of celestial light, or occult fire, to which all the forms of things tend, and in which even ideas itself passes from recognition as meaning and evolve, spring up as all flame does, to escape and to wing away. You do see wings a lot in ancient iconography, a lot. Vesta, or the fire, was worshipped in circular temples, which were the images or the miniatures of the temple of the world, with its dome or cope of stars. It was in the atria of the temples, and in the presence of before the above-mentioned lights, and the forms of ceremonial worship were always observed. It is certain that Vesta was worshipped at Troy, and Aeneas brought her to Italy, for in the Aeneid it is written, quote, okay, yeah, this is in another, some more. I don't know why you didn't just put it in English. Some Latin. Numa settled an order of virgin priestesses whose business and care it was constantly to maintain the holy fire. And long before Numa's day, we find it not only customary but honorable among the Albans to appoint the best known born virgins to be priestesses of Vesta, and to keep up the constant extinguished fire. Now, I'll also say that the Phoenicians were one of the only civilizations, or one of the few, I should say, one of the very few civilizations that had women as priestesses, and this was known throughout antiquity. Many religious institutions through time are very patriarchal, and they didn't allow women to even enter into many of these temples. So keep that in mind. It is from this that sprang the Catholic Vestal, so well known through the civilized nations. This worship was all purity in its beginning, but like many other religious practices, it was abused to such an extent that the underlying principle is no longer recognizable. The foundation of fire worship is in God, and no man can say it is a heathen practice who has given it any consideration whatever. I think that's very true of just human nature, right? You can learn the truth, but there's always that possibility of abusing it to the extreme. When the Virgil speaks of Iarbras in Africa as building 100 temples and 100 altars, he says, quote, okay, this is also in Latin, and that he had concentrated a fire that never went out. And he calls these temples and these lights, or this fire, the, quote, perpetual watch, unquote, or quote, unquote, watch lights, or proof of the presence of the gods, by which expression he means that the places and things were constantly protected and solemnized where such lights burned, and that the celestials or angel defenders, quote unquote, camped, as it were, and were sure to be met with thickly, were these flames upon the altar, and these torches or lights about the temple were studiously and incessantly maintained. Unquote. Thus the customs seem to have been general from the earliest antiquity to maintain a constant fire, as conceiving the god's presence there. This was not merely the opinion of inhabitants of Judea and Phoenicia, actually, more Phoenicia. It extended all over Persia, Greece, Italy, Egypt, and most other nations of the world. Even in the masonry of the present age, there can be no initiation without its lighted tapers. Why? Hold on a second. So the constant fire thing, I just real quick before I finish, one example in the United States, one very famous example of a grave in the United States in Washington, D.C., is the grave of John F. Kennedy with the eternal fire that constantly burns. I just wanted to put that out there. Proffery, imagine that the reason the most ancient mortals kept up a constant, ever-burning fire in honor of the immortal gods was because fire was most like God. He says that the ancients kept an unextinguished fire in their temples to the gods because it was like them. Fire was not especially like the gods, but through it their presence became manifest to mortals. The true God always appeared in brightness and glory, yet no one can say that the brightness was God, but was most like the Shekhinah in which God appeared. Hence the custom arose of keeping up an unextinguished fire in the ancient temples. God then, being wont to appear in fire and being conceived to dwell in fire, the notion spread universally and was universally admitted. First, then, it was not at all out of the way to think of engaging in friendship with God by the same means as they contracted friendship with one another. And since they whom God appeared saw him appear in fire, and they acquainted others with such appearances, he was conceived to dwell in fire. By degrees, therefore, the world came to be over-curious in the fire that was constantly to be kept up, and in things to be sacrificed. And they proceeded from one step to another, till at length they filled up the measure of their aberrations, which were in reality instigated by their zeal, and by their intense desire to mitigate the displeasure of their divinities, for religion was much more intense feeling in earlier days, by passing into undesirable ceremonies in regard to this fire which they reverenced as the last possible physical form of the divinity, not only in its grandeur and power, but also in its purity. The pyramidal or triangular form which fire assumes in its ascent to heaven is the monolithic typology used to signify the great generative power. We have only to look to Stonehenge, Ellora, Babel towers of Central Africa, the gigantic ruins scattered all over Tartary and India, to see how gloriously they symbolize the majestic of the Supreme Being. To these upright obelisks or lithoi of the Old World, including the Bethel or Jacob's Pillar or Pillow raised in the plain of Luz, we will add, as the commemorative or reminding shape of the fire, the pyramids of Egypt, the millenarius gnomon, metastone or mark called London Stone, and all crosses raised at the junction of four roads, all market crosses, the round towers of Ireland, and in all the changeable aspects of their genealogy, all the spires and towers in their great hieroglyphic proclamation all over the world. And you could probably add Sardinia to that too, because they have a lot of these like round towers all over Sardinia and in Spain. Thus, in what has been written, mighty truths have been given to all neophytes. Oh, wait a minute. You know what? So not only that, I just mentioned Sardinia and all that, but it's not just that. In the United States, and I'm going to highlight this so I can remember to go back to it. But in the United States, when the colonists first came here, there were a ton of these so-called round towers all over the place in New England and all over the all over parts of the United States. It's very interesting, and a lot of them were destroyed, and it's very weird because like in New England there are 250,000 miles of stone walls that are actually much of it is interconnecting. The story is that a bunch of farmers just stacked these walls for that amount of time. Again, 250,000 square miles of stone walls. Uh, that's an insane amount of time. And I live around here in New England, so and I do live among these stone walls, and some of these rocks are enormous. There's no way anyone would waste their time moving these things. So, let me finish this chapter. Thus, in what has been written, mighty truths have been given to all neophytes, initiates, and mystics, whereby they should profit. It is the duty of those of the secret schools who are undergoing training and while in quote unquote practice to have their light lighted and to burn incense, for where the light and incense are, the impure elements dare not enter, and thus is the neophyte afforded protection, provided mind and heart are kept pure from impious and unworthy thoughts. Likewise, when you see the light, listen to the voice of the light, unquote, as Moses of the old listened to the voice in the burning bush. Oh, okay, philosophy of fire, philosophy of the Persians. Let's see, how long are we at here? No, it doesn't even say. An hour and 15? Yeah, I'll go for a little while longer. Okay, the philosophy of the Persians. Let me wet my whistle here. As a great general principle, the initiated, as do all the members of the secret schools of the present, designated the soul of fire called from the eternal ocean of light. Let's see how long this chapter is. Okay. All right, so I'll do the philosophy of the Persians, and then I'm gonna quit it for now. I might be back a little bit later. I have to do a couple of things, but I might come back a little bit later to knock off a bunch more of this book. So maybe we can wrap this one up, and then I can do an analysis. So the philosophy of the Persians. Pardon me. In regard to the supernatural, using the word in its widest sense, it may be said that quote, all the difficulty in admitting the strange things told us lies in the non-admission of an internal cause world as absolutely real. It is said in intellectually admitting, because the influence of the arts prove that man's feelings always have admitted and still do admit this reality. The Persian philosophy of vision is that it is the view of objects really existing in interior light, which assume form not according to arbitrary laws, but according to the state of mind. This interior light, so if any of you guys know anything about the theories of projection of the, what is it, the holographic universe. This is kind of what they're talking about here, huh? This interior light unifies with exterior light in the eye and is thus drawn to essential or imaginative activity, but when the outward light is separated, it reposes in its own serene atmosphere. It is then, in this state of interior repose, that the usual class of religious or what are called inspired visions occur. It is the same light of eternity so frequently alluded to in books that treat of mysterious objects. The light revealed in Pinmender, Zoroaster, and all the sages of the East as the emanation of the spiritual sun. Bowman writes of it in his Divine Vision of Contemplation, and Molinos in his Spiritual Guide, whose work is the ground of Quietism, Quietism being the foundation of the religion of the people called Friends or Quakers, as also of the other mystic or meditative sects. We enlarge from a very learned, candid, and instructive book upon the occult science. Regard fire, then, with other eyes than with those soulless, incurious ones with which thou hast looked upon. It is the most ordinary thing. Thou hast forgotten what it is, or rather thou hast never known. Chemists are silent about it, or we may not say that it is, or may we not say that it is too loud for them? Therefore shall they speak fearfully of it in whispers. Philosophers talk of it as anatomists discourse of the contents or the parts of the human body as a piece of mechanism, wondrous though it be. Such the wheels of the clock, say they, in their ingenious expounding of the quote-unquote whys and the quote-unquote wherefores, and the mechanics and the mathematics of the mysterious thing with a supernatural soul in it called world. Such is the chain, such are the balances, such the larger and smaller mechanical forces, such the quote-unquote time blood, as it were, that is sent circulating through it. Such is the striking with an infinity of bells. It is made for man, this world, and it is greatly like him. That is mean, they should add. That is mean, they would add. Let me go back one. Okay. It is made for man, this world, and it is greatly like him. That is mean, they would add. Note the goings of the fire as he creepeth, serpentineth, riseth, slinketh, broadeneth. Note him reddening, glowing, whitening. Tremble at his face, dilating at the meaning that is growing into you. That is growing into it, to you. See that spark from the blacksmith's anvil, struck as an insect out of the sky, containing a whole cloud of such rare locusts of which Pharaoh and the cities of the plain read the old secret. 1, 2, 3 sparks, dozen come, fast and faster the fiery squadrons follow, until in a short while a whole possible army of that hungry thing for battle, for food, for it, fire, glances up. But it is soon warned in again, lest acres should glow in the growing advance. I'm sorry, guys, but the print on this book is kind of screwed up on this page a little bit. Think that this thing is bound as in matter chains. Okay. Think that this thing is bound as in matter chains. Think that he is outside of all things and deep in the inside of all things, and that thou and thy world are only the thing between, and that outside and inside are both identical. Couldst thou understand the supernatural truths? Reverence the fire for its meaning, and tremble at it, though in the earth it be chained, and the foot of the archangel Michael, like upon the dragon, be upon it. Avert the face from it, as the magi turned, dreading, and as the symbol before it bowed askance. So much this great thing, fire. Observe the multiform shapes of fire, the flame wreaths, the spires, the stars, the spots, the cascades, and the mighty falls of it, where the roar, when it grows high in imperial masterdom as that of Niagara. Think that it can do what it is. Watch the trail of sparks, struck as in that spouting arc from the metal shoes of the trampling horse. It is a letter of the great alphabet. The familiar London streets even can give the Persian's god, though in thy pleasures and in thy commerce operations thou so oft forgottest thy own God. Whence liberated are those sparks, as stars afar off, of a whole sky of flames, sparks deep down in possibility, though close to us, great in their meaning, though small in their show, as distant single ships of whole fiery fleets. Animate children of, in thy human conception, a dreadful but in reality a great world, of which thou knowest nothing. They fall floodless on the rejecting, barren, and on the outside the coldest stone. But in each stone, fence flinty and chilling as the outside is a heart of fire, to strike at which is to bid gush forth the waters, as it were, of every fire, like waters of the rock. Truly, out of the sparks can be displayed a whole acreage of fireworks. Forests can be conceived of flame. Palaces of the fire, grandest things, sole things, last things, all things. Wonder no longer then, if rejected so long as idolatry, the ancient Persians and their masters, the Magi, concluding that they saw, quote unquote, all in the supernaturally magnificent element, fell down and worshipped it, making it the visible representation of the very truest. But yet in man's speculation and in his philosophers, nay, in his common reason, impossible God being everywhere and in us, indeed us in the God-lighted man, and impossible to be contemplated or known outside, being all. Lights and flames and torches, as it were, of fire, all fire in this world, the last background on which all things were painted, may be considered as quote-unquote lancets of another world, the last world, circles enclosed by thick walls, which, however, by the fire are kept from closing of this world. As fire in brandishes will the walls of this world wave, and as it were, undulate from about it. In smoke and disruption or combustion of matter, we witness a phenomenon of the burning as of the edges of the matter rings of this world, in which world is fire, like a spot, that dense and hard thing, matter holding it in, oxygen, which is the finest of air, and is the means of the quickest burning out, or the supernatural in this world, exhilaration of animal life, or extenuation of the solid, and above all, the heightening of the capacity of the human, as being the quintessence of matter. This oxygen is the thing which feeds fire the most overwhelmingly. How interesting. Kind of bringing oxygen into that idea, right? It's saying inside our souls, we are made of fire in the inside of us, that celestial fire, that, whatever, and we breathe oxygen, right? So we breathe oxygen that nourishes our body, but strange, so interesting, that, when we die, our fire goes out and we no longer breathe oxygen, or the fire goes out because, say, we are drowned, or we are suffocated because we no longer can keep the fire going. Very interesting. I didn't make that connection the first time I read this. Nor would the speck, spots, and stars of fire stop in this dense world medium. In this tissue or sea of things, could it farther and farther fasten upon and devour the solids, eating as it were through them? But as this thick world is a thing the thickest, it presses out, thrusts, or gravitates upon, and stifles in its too great weight, and conquers not only that liveliest, subtlest, thinnest element of solids, the finest air, by whatever chemical name, oxygen, azote, ozone, or whatnot it may be called, which in fact is merely the nomenclature of its composition, the naming of the ingredients which make the thing, but not the thing. The denseness of the world not only conquers this, we repeat, but so too figure it. Matter stamps upon it, effaces and treads out fire, which else would burn on back as in the beginning of things, or unto itself, consuming as in great revenge of anything being created other than it, all the mighty worlds which in creation were permitted out of it. This is the teaching of the ancient fire philosophers, re-established and restored to the days of the comprehension of them, in the conclusion of the Rosicrucians of later times, who discovered the eternal fire, also found quote-unquote God in the quote-unquote immortal light. And it says, see Divine Alchemy for Mysteries of Fire / sex. And it makes you wonder what the tantric stuff is really all about too, because that's that whole sexual power stuff that they're talking about, but it's more of a spiritual based type of thing. There are all grades or graduations of the density of matter, but in all coheres by the one law of gravitation. Now this gravitation is mistaken for a force of itself, when it is nothing but the sympathy or the taking away of the supposed thing between two other things. It is sympathy or appetite seeking its food, or as the closing together of two things. It is not because one mass of matter is more ponderable or attractive than another, out of our senses and in reality, but that they are the same with different amounts of affection, and that like seeks like, not recognizing or knowing that between. Now this thing, which is, as it were, slipped between, which we strike into a show of itself, or into fire, surprised and driven out of its ambush, is fire. It is as the letter by which matter spells itself out, so to speak. Now matter is only to be finally forced asunder by heat, flame being the bright, subtle something which comes last, and is the expansion, fruit, crown, or glory of heat. It is the vivid invisible soul, essence and spirit of heat, the last evolvement before rending and before the forcible closing again of all the central speeding weights or desires of matter. Flame is the expanding out, or even exploding flower to this growing thing. Heat, it is at the bubble of it, the fruit to which before we have likened it, or seed in the outside hand upon it. Given the supernatural flora, heat is As the gorgeous plant inflame the glorifying flower, and as growth is greater out of the greater matrix or matter of growing, so the thicker the material of fire, as we may roughly figure it, though we hope we shall be understood. So the stronger shall be the fire, and of necessity the fiercer will it be perceived to be the fiercer will it be perceived to be, result being according to power. Thus we get more of fire, that is heat, out of the hard things, there being more of the things fire in more of the thing fire in them. But fire disjoints, as it were, all the hinges of the house, laps out of the coherence of it, sets ablaze the dense thing matter makes the dark metals run like waters of light, conjures the black devils out of the minerals, and to our astonishment shows them much libeled, blinding angel white. By fire we can lay our hand upon the solids, part them, powder them, melt them, fine them, drive them out to more and more delicate and palpable texture, firing their invisible molecules or imponderables into clouds, into mist, into gas, out of seeing, into smelling, out of smelling, into nothing, into real nothing, not even into the last blue sky. These are the potent operations of fire, the crucible into which we cast all the worlds and find them in their last evolution. Not even smoke. These are physical and scientific facts which there can be no gainsaying, which were seen and found out long ago, ages ago, in the reveries first, and then in the practice of the great magnetists, Rosicrucians, those who were called the fire philosophers, of whom we have spoken before. What is the mysterious and inscrutable operation, the striking of fire from flint? Familiar as it is, who remarks it? Where in that hardest, closest pressing together of matter, where the granulation compresses, shining even in its hardness into the solidest laminae of cold, darkest blue and streaky core like agate, resembling white, lie the seeds of fire, spiritual flame seeds to the so stony fruit? In what folds of the flint in the block of it? In what invisible recesses, speckled and spotted, in what tissue crouch the fire sparks? To issue in showers on the stroke of iron, on the so sudden clattering as the crowbars of man, on its stony doors. Stone carving the thing fire unseen as its sepulchre, stroke warning the magical thing forth. Whence comes that trail of fire from the cold bosom of hard, secret, exploding flint? Children, as from that hard, rocky breast, ye hiding its so sacred, sudden fire birth? Who and what scientist, philosopher can explain this wondrous darting forth of the hidden something which we shall try in vain to arrest, but which, like a spirit, escaped him? If we ask what fire is, of the man of science, they are at fault. They will tell us that it is a phenomenon that their vocabularies can give no further account. This will explain to us all that can be said of it, that it is a last affection of matter to the results of what, in the world of man, they can only testify, but of whose coming and of whose going, of the place from whence it came, and the whereabouts to which it goeth, they are entirely ignorant, and would give a word to know. The foregoing, however feeble expressed, are a few of the views of the Rosicrucians respecting the nature of this supposedly familiar but yet a puzzling thing, fire. And here's a little thing for the inner mystery of the fire philosophy of the Rosicrucians, see Divine Alchemy. I guess I'll have to look for that one. So I'm going to wrap it up for now at the moment. But I think I might come back later. Oops. Sorry. I think I might come back later. So just to finish it off, because we're on page 121. And okay, 210. So we got less than 100 pages left. So I'd like to come back and do the rest of this and just finish this off. But there is some pretty interesting stuff there. It's a little bit difficult reading for some of it because, as you guys could see, it's just there's um there's a lot of like weird breaks all over the place. They put commas and parentheses and all kinds of different stuff, like just breaking apart these extremely long run-on sentences, which I'm doing my best reading, but it's not easy. So, anyways, thank you very much, guys, for joining me today. I really appreciate that. Um, this is again just a reading of a straight up book. I'm going to be again doing this with as much time as I can with lots of other different books. But I think there's some really interesting stuff that we read today, um, especially for those people who are looking into things like alternative. When you look at alternative or these ideas that they may have been using electromagnetism or they understood electricity in the old days, and they and there's plenty of channels that definitely show this. Flat Earth British, my brother from another mother, Martin Liedtke, he he shows lots of stuff like that. John Levy's channel shows lots of stuff like that, and lots of other people um, go into that sort of field. And yes, it's one of those things where it's a theory, but it's funny how this book talks about these old. They talked about the electromagnetism earlier on, and that these magnetists, i.e., the Rosicrucians, have known this kind of stuff for a long time. So yeah, it's one of those things where I think we have some good clues here. But yet again, they talk about they go into the Bible quite a bit here, but and I think that and also the idea that the pyramid is created in terms of fire. And I thought one of the good, interesting takeaway from this is the idea that fire and water are essentially the same. And I think that's really interesting because especially if you watch Martin Liedtke's channels, Flat Earth British, we run across this kind of stuff all the time. We see fire, we see water themes, but if they're synonymous with each other in a way, that takes a whole different kind of aspect to this, which I think is really cool. Anyways, I do appreciate you guys joining me today, and I will see you probably shortly for the next video. Peace.